All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 157. It is Tuesday night. It is 10 p.m. This is when we like to talk to you and hear what's on your mind in this wonderful college football realm. It's been 7 days since the last call-in show, and a few things have happened. We've had a few guests. We had Phil Steele, and we had Stuart Mandel yesterday. Both of those are still recorded, and you can listen to those whenever you get a chance. But this is when we get a chance to chat, and obviously a lot has gone on. So if there's something you'd like to talk about, by all means, hit request, and we'll get you up here, and we'll talk about that. I'm going to be joined by one of the folks here at our CFB, Andrew Sagona. I'm going to go ahead and let him up. Beyond just the conference shifts, the big theme is what's going to happen to, I guess, the continuing adventures of the Pac-4 and friends, if there are friends for the Pac-4. But we're still heading into the regular season as well, and all of these teams are still in their original conferences. So we get one more last hurrah when this season begins in a few weeks, and a little more than a few weeks. But it's exciting to think that we've got college football around the corner. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing very well, sir. How are you?
Good. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention before I forgot. I'm sorry. Just wanted to get this one out of the way just before we get into any real deep. We have one to wish a belated happy birthday to Lee Corso. He turned 88 yesterday. So I hope we get to have him. I mean, they've confirmed he's coming back to the show. So that's good. We'll see him in Charlotte in a few weeks, but a little more than a few weeks. Keep saying a few weeks. Keep wanting to jump the gun on that. I see we have someone who wants to come up and join us. Let's see here. I'm going to let you up, John, in 1 second. Going to add you as a speaker. So again, if you want to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. You just have to hit request from the Twitter app. Hey, John, what's going on? How are you?
Hey, man. How you doing tonight?
Great.
Well, first of all, congrats on 150. I know I didn't get to say it, two times ago because you guys have been having people speak, cool visitors and stuff coming by. But congrats on 150.
Yeah, thanks. It was really kind of funky too because we didn't realize. It was just weird timing. It actually was both. Phil Steele was the 50th show and the 150th show. And we didn't plan that. It just kind of ended up that way. So, the neat things that happen when you plan these things. But yeah, so what's on your mind, though? There's a lot of things going on. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oof. Yeah, you're not kidding. I know we've talked about many times early, during the year about conference realignment and, the what ifs of what could happen. And pretty much all the what ifs almost happened. It's just gone completely crazy. And I know one thing I think no one's really talked about, and I'm not sure, even with the remote possibility of this occurring, but of course, with teams moving to different conferences and certain, group of five or even, now even a Power 5 conference being low on members, I'm kind of curious what the possibility of FCS teams being caught up into the fold. I mean, we saw Jacksonville State and Kennesaw State coming next year as well as Sam Houston State. I'm just curious on what you think of, the possibility of a FCS team moving up and possibly what team it could be or which teams.
That's a great question. And I think FCS, I know programs as a whole and their fans have been kind of relieved that they've stayed out of what just happened in the last week because, again, we don't need to restate how chaotic it's been. But as far as FCS programs, you're absolutely right. We got Sam Houston State and Jacksonville State are going to be in Conference USA starting this season. And then next season, Kennesaw State starts in Conference USA as well. In fact, they just announced their first game as an FBS program is going to be at UTSA to open, I think it's August 31st of next year in the Alamo Dome. But I think if any, FCS is going to be kind of last in line in all of this. I'm not saying that they're not going to move. There's not going to be a possibility that someone gets grabbed, but I think we're going to have to first see what happens to the Pac-4, what ends up. I mean, because there's so many scenarios out there, and we could review them later on as we get into this. But I mean, there's all kinds of rumors of is it going to end up with a merger with the Mountain West, or is it going to be the Mountain West breaking up and some of them joining the Pac, rebuilding the Pac-4 and the continuing adventures of the Pac, or however you want to call it, or are some of them going to move to the ACC? I mean, SMU suddenly came up as being a possibility for moving to the ACC. That's come up in some credible, reporting. People who don't necessarily report wild rumors have been mentioning that one today. So I think we're going to have to first see how much more the FBS programs that are already on the FBS level settle. And then I think, especially if, for example, we see one of the G5 start to get heavily poached, I think that program, that conference will maybe start looking to see who's nearby, because again, you don't want to, it's not the same ball game money wise for an FCS program to jump up to FBS. It's not like you're going to have someone willing to do I mean, other than the exception, which is the Pioneer Football League, which is its really, really unique exception there, because they're a non-scholarship football, but scholarship all other sports. Setting them aside in the FCS, it's not going to be realistic for one of them to just join a conference that's across the country. So let's say, and again, this is totally hypothetical. I don't have any insight on whether this is actually going to happen, but let's say the Mountain West gets partially poached to join what's left of the Pac-12, and to kind of rebuild itself. Then the Mountain West would be in an interesting position. How would it consider building up its membership again? Do you start looking at the Big Sky because it's right there? You've got some programs that could probably move up if they really wanted to. Although I don't know how much, the Montana schools have always been up for it. North Dakota State's always out there in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. You've got programs out there that could theoretically, but to be fair, I mean, we had the AD, Matt Larson, join us for last summer for a Twitter space, and they were very happy being what they are at the FCS level. But there's certainly programs that would like that opportunity. But I think before we know which ones they are, we'll have to see what settles at this point. Because Conference USA, that's what they did. They poached people that were, they didn't poach, but they elevated programs. They were willing to accept programs that were in the kind of their general footprint. Jacksonville State's mostly close to some of their programs. So is Sam Houston State. I remember last year when we were talking about what would be an interesting possibility was a program in the FCS level that it's funny. They did it under the radar. For 1 year, Florida A&M, the HBCU in Tallahassee, moved up to FBS and flopped so badly because they didn't plan it well. This is in like 2005. I keep forgetting. It's like 04, 05. And they went right back down. And a lot of people didn't even notice they were an FBS program for that one season. So, I mean, we thought, well, they're in the footprint of Conference USA, so if they decided to jump up again, I mean, hell, they're right there. And they've got a good coach right now. They've got a decent enough program. But I think that was kind of a long-winded answer to where I think we'd end up with another FCS program moving up or not. Andrew, I know you wanted to jump in on this, and then I promise we'll get to you, Hussein.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I'm just kind of jumping off of what you're saying. I think certain schools, you mentioned Big Sky, NDSU, SDSU, all indications are they're fine where they are, especially North Dakota State. They're winning championships every other year. I don't see an indication that they're going to want to move to the FBS level. I think the only conference I could see really getting poached, Sunbelt is sturdy.
Yeah, they're very sturdy.
No one's going to try. They're very sturdy. No one's going to try poaching them. Or if they tried, no one's going to want to move. I'd say the most stable conference is MAC, which is crazy. That is a bastion of stability in a crazy, unstable conference realignment world. AAC, the American, might get poached. They seem like they're the ones always getting poached, and I can attest to that personally as a UCF fan. CUSA is always kind of ripe for poaching. MTSU, Middle Tennessee, and WKU, Western Kentucky, were almost poached, but one of the two said no thank you, and now everyone is angry at them for not taking the invitation to the American. So maybe if there's another shot, they'll take it. But yeah, like you said, right now there aren't a whole lot of openings for an FCS school, and I don't know how many would be ready to take that jump monetarily.
Well, and it is a commitment. And I think, again, there is some financial benefit, but it's hard to see, And again, kind of going back to that Sunbelt point, they were the ones in last year that benefited the most from that immediate kind of bout of G5 realignment. They were the strongest by taking off teams like Marshall and Southern Miss, and kind of really that program, that conference has always been very, deliberate in their approach, and that is something that has paid off for them. When I remember in 2015, when I first went to their media day, they were kind of the basket case conference, and they have this plan. We're going to stick with ESPN. We're not going to ask for a ton of money, but we're just going to be stable. We're going to be a geographic footprint, and we're going to keep moving forward. And somehow, yeah, that ended up being the correct answer in all of that. The MAC just doesn't really have teams that are that desirable, and they're thick. And I mean, I don't mean that to, but that's part of their stability. They've always been around each other. The oldest, I think, the oldest or the second oldest conference, and their newest member is Akron. And I mean, I think the only thing that would not shock me, is if a program like Akron just finally said, okay, we can't do this anymore, because they've been struggling an awful lot, not only on the field but off the field, to keep that program moving. But yeah, they're definitely on the stable side. Now, I want to let's see here. We got Hussein who wants to come up here. I'm going to let you up right now. Again, if you want to join the conversation, we'd really enjoy talking to you. There's so much going on in college football, not just the conferences. Oh, and one other thing. It was funny. I just wanted to go back to this because we brought up the American. In the vast number of sources that are out there, and again, not coming from a complete fly-by-night website, supposedly the American was interested in adding the remaining 4 Pac-12 schools, Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. But I am not sure if that would necessarily go anywhere. Although, with what's going on with Oregon State and Wazoo, maybe they would be willing to go. Only because finding them a new home is going to be an interesting question in all of this, especially now that there are, very mild rumors. I mean, the ACC is supposedly looking at Cal and Stanford, although I don't know if they would necessarily go there. And then in that same conversation, apparently they're also looking at Southern Methodist, because Southern Methodist is really, they're the program that is willing to literally do anything to join a P5 conference. They don't, well, I guess P4 conference at this point, but they're willing to literally do anything. They will pay whatever you want. They will take as little money as you give them. They just want to be at that conference. They remind me, oh gosh, the last time there was major conference realignment, 13 years ago, it reminds me of the attitude that Memphis and ECU were having and all of that, because Memphis had there were a couple of big boosters. ECU just wanted to play anybody. So hearing SMU right now, it reminds me of that program that is literally willing to do anything just to be part of it. But yeah, so Hussein, you've been really patient. What's going on?
Hi, CFB Andrew. Thank you guys for having me. I'm a proud Oregon State Beaver, graduate that currently goes to grad school out of Wisconsin. So I kind of have been experienced both cultures out west and out in the Midwest. And it's just been like kind of a lot of whirlwind of emotions so far this past weekend, couple of days with all the big things that's happened in college football. And on top of that, just having our most anticipated season since 2008. I was just wondering, do you ever see this coming back to whatever we loved about the sport like 15 years ago? Since the homogenization of the sport is gonna kill some of the things we loved about it. And I was just wondering, are we ever gonna go back to having something that was that for every part of every corner of the country? Since I've tailgated out in the Midwest, and it's so different from tailgating out west, and I'm just trying to I just can't comprehend how this sport is going to be a national sport.
Yeah,
thank you for listening.
Yeah, no, it's been really tough for a lot of y'all out there, especially Beavs and Cougs out west. And as you said, for those who aren't aware, Oregon State, the first major poll that came out was a preseason coaches poll, and they're number 18. This is supposed to be a breakout year for Oregon State to challenge for the Pac-12. Because again, this is still a full conference season coming up. Nothing's changing for this upcoming season. But this has got to really take the wind out of the sails a little bit. Of course, conversely, is just going to give both those programs, plus Stanford and Cal, a chip on their shoulders to play even harder. I'm hoping to see more. Andrew, I know you wanted to comment on this.
Yes. Well, first off, Hussein, I want to say my condolences. That the least I can say is that really sucks what is happening to Oregon State. I really like you guys. I prefer you over Oregon, but I digress. To your question about do you think this is going national in the future? My opinion, and I think I've seen this a few times. I think even the RCFB account tweeted this out. I'm of the opinion that in the next, I'm going to say 20 to 30 years from now, and I'm no prognosticator, so I could be completely wrong, but I think in 20 to 30 years, we're going to start seeing kind of a shift back to regionalism. Partially because I think streaming is going to be so prevalent at that point that, who knows, cable may not exist any longer. And I think the athletes are going to be tired of these cross-country trips. And we're seeing over the past few years, athletes are getting more and more empowered to stand up for themselves, to make unions or try to make unions. I think in 20 to 30 years, the athletes may have their own unions and be able to say, hey, we don't want this anymore. You're already seeing some softball players from Oregon speaking out against this. So yeah, my ultimate point being, I think this is just a phase. Eventually, it'll get back to more regionalism, is my opinion.
I think definitely one thing is inevitable. I think we're going to get players are going to be employees at some point. I think we're headed in that direction. There's no way we're not at this point. I remember we talked with Stuart Manziel yesterday, and he was of that same opinion, just as anyone who's been on that kind of macro observation level. It seems that's going to be something that whether or not they'll have any ability to demand regional play, I'm not sure. But certainly it will eventually create an interesting situation for compensation and really might divide the haves and have-nots even more, quite honestly. One of the more interesting arguments I read by a professor who I highly respect in sports law, Michael McCann, who's currently ranked for Sportico, he noted that this might be a good opportunity for super conferences, if it is just the Big Ten and SEC, or at least the upper echelon. And this is something that's been talked about for many years, but to really truly separate from the rest of the NCAA, at least for football, because people have to remember the NCAA. It's insane. They have literally over 500,000 athletes. When you count all the sports, all the divisions, there are over 520,000 people playing NCAA sports each year. Of that group, maybe 10,000 play big money college sports, the big time college sports, the ones that we're all talking about now, and hoops and all of that stuff. So the thought is they should separate those programs now and create some rules for them, only because the fear is eventually, and I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this because we've talked about it on previous shows, but with the way NIL is going, with the kind of radical moves some of the states are doing, where they're just trying to please constituents and loosen up those NIL rules to the point where anyone can pay anybody, eventually a judge is going to just say, you know what, somebody's going to make a legal argument, and a court is absolutely going to buy it and say, everyone on these college teams are just basically employees with slight, a cloak of an amateur athlete on it. But no, they are purely employees now. And that will be okay for an Ohio State or a Texas or USC or an Alabama. But, all these D3 programs, all these, some of the lower FBS programs, they're not going to be able to maintain this. That's going to completely create havoc. So if you really want to think about what's absolutely the most scary thing that could happen to college sports, that is it within the realm of reason. If that happens, we're going to see something that is completely off the chart. But I'm not going to worry about this exact moment. I want to let some other people up here. Let's see here. I see CJB. You've been patient, and I'm going to get to you, and I promise we'll get to there you are, Coach Clark, and I'll get to Curry Hicks Sage. I promise we'll get to as many of you as we can. But CJB, what's going on?
What's up, guys? I'm a UCF fan, so I'm very grateful to have just barely made it into the dance here.
Charge on.
Yeah, charge on, baby. Hussein, I want to echo what Andrew said. My condolences. Oregon State and Wazoo are in a really tough spot now. My question for you guys is just thoughts on ACC, what that looks like if Cal and Stanford are being recruited over that way, and SMU as well. Is that going to force the hand of Florida State and Clemson to get a little louder, get a little noisier, and try to bounce out of there and head for somewhere else?
That is one of the most fascinating. The ACC, even prior to last week, had been the most intriguing conference, only because there's so many things that could happen, and they've been quiet. Partially quiet. We know Florida State has been making a lot of noise starting in February with that really dramatic Board of Regents meeting, or Board of Trustees, I forget which one they call it. And it had to be public, so they basically laid out their situation that they were very unhappy with their conference, and they wanted to figure out, can they get out? Because as they were putting it, Vanderbilt is making more money than we are because they're in the SEC and we're still Florida State, and going along those lines of thinking. So to an extent, we've heard Clemson's in the same boat, just not as loud as Florida State is in all of this. One of the things that should be noted is, and I forget, that both the president of the school and the head of their board have basically hinted that, yes, there is a grant of rights. Yes, it is a lot of money. And the numbers out there seem to be $100 and something million to get out of that contract that they signed. But they said it wouldn't be the thing that would keep us back. Now, that might just be bluster. One thing that certainly seems to be on the table is the ACC maybe heading in the way of some other conferences where they're going to do an uneven distribution, where Florida State and Clemson will take a bigger piece of the pie at the expense of some of the other programs. And that's happened before. That created animosity in the Big 12 back in the day when Texas was there. So, and they're still there, but I mean, that was one of the biggest problems that led to some of the original departures in that conference. But looking again at the ACC, even if they do that model, it doesn't seem like they would still reach the levels that are being thrown out there by the Big Ten and the SEC. So if they were to bring on Stanford and Cal and SMU, you bring in some new markets that would be out of the ACC country. I mean, again, we got the Metroplex for SMU. You've got the Bay Area and to an extent California as a whole, which is a lot of people. It's 55 million people in that state. So if you can cut even a small piece of the pie, you can really add to a TV market. But at the same time, it's so tentative now because there's so many factors we don't know. We don't know how it would affect the grant of rights. Anything that would risk letting the horses out of the barn, being FSU and Clemson in particular, and they would almost certainly be followed by, you could make argument. It's really almost fun to figure out who would be attractive to whom if the ACC broke up. I personally think, I could see Clemson and FSU potentially being part of the SEC. I could also see the Big Ten being very interested in UVA, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Miami. Those all fit right into their wheelhouse of being members of the American Association of Universities, that prestigious club that they like to recruit from. Because all four teams they got from the Pac-12 are in that group. All of their programs, all their programs but Nebraska. But to be fair, there's an asterisk. Nebraska was a member of that association when they were brought in, and then they immediately lost their membership because they had changed the equation where all their agricultural research was no longer counted. It's a long story. But all of that said, I think anything that goes on with bringing those three programs is going to have to be balanced with, can it keep the money coming in? I'm sure there are some people out there who specialize in this, who are running those numbers. Everything is tentative now. No one is certain if that will really go anywhere. If it doesn't, we'll probably know the answer, that they couldn't make those numbers work. But if they do land, I guess it'll be interesting to see. It seems weird only because those two programs, if they weren't desirable to the Big Ten, why would suddenly they be attractive to crossing the entire country to the East Coast?
I'm wondering whether it's if it's the ACC actually wanting those programs to increase, what they're bringing in, or if they're thinking that they're getting ahead of Florida State and Clemson possibly leaving, and so they're wanting to, kind of, backload that.
Only if they can increase the pot. I think it's only if they can increase the pot to a sizable difference, they will do it. But if they can't, there's no way. And I think it's gonna. This is. I mean, as bad as it is for Wazoo and Oregon State, it's really weird for Stanford and Cal because they are just absolutely being told that yeah, you're smart, but I'm a USC fan, so this is kind of a little bit of Schadenfreude because they love to pull rank on USC and to a lesser extent UCLA, but I feel bad for them. But this is such an awkward time for those programs, especially Cal. I mean, Cal, we've brought it up before. I'm just going to run over this real quick. They made such a gamble when they redid that stadium. I think it was 2012 when California Memorial Stadium was redone. They needed to redo it. They built it across a fault before they knew they built it across a fault, like, 100 years ago, not quite 100 years ago. So they decided, well, if we're going to renovate the stadium, let's go for broke. So they spent an incredible amount of money on that. Here's the problem. They budgeted the renovation based on, if you build it, they will come model of thinking. So Cal, even though they'd had success, they'd had Aaron Rodgers, they'd had, stunning success on the field, but they just, they never quite had it consistent. I still remember, 2001, they were absolutely awful. So they were hoping somehow this would let them become as successful as an Ohio State or a USC. And they would sell seat licenses at high fees. None of that materialized. So Cal has been running at an insane debt for that stadium deal that they literally have to pay back over 100 years. And they've been borrowing from the academic university. I mean, if you look at the list of academic debt among university athletic programs, they are double the next team down. So all of that said, now Cal is facing getting less per year from a media deal. Oregon State, Washington State, they made investments in their program based on the money they were pulling in, being a member of the Pac-12. We know that. But Cal is by far drowning before they even. That's part of the reason why UCLA was so thrilled to go with USC to the to the Big Ten. Their athletic department was also running in the red, and this should help them stave that off. But Cal, oh my goodness, if they are stuck with, it'll be interesting to watch. It's going to be an ugly, dramatic thing for that financial solution, and that's another reason why taking them in. It's like, ooh, you're taking in that program. I don't think they can even commit anything to being a football program, at the level that would be some of the ones that they would want to replace them with. Stanford, I'm giving them a pass because if Stanford wants to, they could just buy Cal. I mean, they could do whatever they wanted to. They've got literally a $60 billion endowment. I mean, they literally could do whatever the hell they wanted to. But I still remember, I'm sorry, I'm going to get to one more. I want to move on to another caller, but the thing that amazed me doing a media day, and it was not even for the Pac-12, it was for the Mountain West, but I talked to someone who had been a coach at Stanford, and he wasn't with San Jose State, but he said San Jose State's got such a problem. They're in a really expensive market, so if you're an assistant coach not getting paid a lot, it's really hard to afford to live near where you're working because San Jose State's in some of the most expensive real estate in America. And they said Stanford, meanwhile, they had a booster build a townhouse community for basically a mix of staff, but also athletic staff. So they would have a place to live near the campus in an even more expensive part of the Bay Area. Like, that's what Stanford could do if they want to. But if they want to is a huge push. So anyway, I want to let some more people up here. Let's see here. Coach Clark, I'm going to let you up. And then I promise we'll keep moving through and going through as many of you all as we can. Coach Clark, what's going on? It's been a while.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I've had a pretty busy summer. I got to see my brother is an expat. He works in China, for a cell phone company. So I got to see him this summer for the first time in 3 years. And I got to meet his wife and his 5-month-old baby boy, who will be the first commit of 2041. It's weird coaching college football because you got all your regular busy times in season, recruiting, spring ball, and then you get really busy at the beginning of the summertime. We had a showcase where we had a bunch of teams show up, so I got to rub elbows with Dan Lanning, Jonathan Smith, coaches from some other stuff. You're picking their mind. Then we had our resident football camp, I had a good time doing that. I'd officiate and keep score on some 7-on-7 games and scrimmages. And, Western's a small world, so I run into high school coaches that have either coached me or I coached with, or they coach my friends. We have players on our staff I've coached with and against. I mean, in our program, and it's, last time I checked, my old roommates, their sister plays volleyball at our school. It's a small world there at Woo. And I, like any good coach, I've been getting ready with one of my tasks, which is scripting North Dakota State and breaking down huddle right now. Still there?
Yeah, it's a busy time. What are your thoughts on what's been going on, though? I know we've talked about this and over the season, off season, I should say. What are your thoughts on what's been going on, especially out west?
Well, in the words of Mike Leach, on the Pac-12 network, when one of the reporters asked him for wedding advice, this is what he said: "Your mom is going to lose her mind. Your dad, your bride is going to lose her mind. They are all going to lose their mind. God rest his soul." I don't know. I don't know if you checked your DMs, but I sent you a video. I sent your Twitter DM some circus music and the Benny Hill theme song.
I saw that.
I think it's insanity, but the sun's going to rise tomorrow. I mean, from my perspective, I'm coaching at Western. We are playing conference games in Texas on half of these schools' budget. They'll figure something out. And if anyone asks, maybe some type of merger with the Mountain West with the remaining schools. I think they ought to try to make another power conference, because I think this whole thing power 5 and greater 6 is ridiculous. Because, like if you look at Boise State, their record against the Pac-12 is actually pretty good. Same thing with Fresno State. And one thing I will say about the Mountain West is they've got some coaches that have stuck around. The longest tenured coach in the Pac-12 is Kyle Whittingham.
Now he's going to be one of the longer ones in the Big 12.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess that's one thing I appreciate at Western that you don't see anywhere else around here, is that, Coach Ferguson, he's celebrating 20 years this year, and he's been, as head coach, and he's been here longer than that. He's been a familiar face. He's got a good relation. We've probably had the best recruiting class we've ever had, because up and down the West Coast, we have great relationships with a lot of the high school and JUCO coaches. They come to our camps. They see us at the clinics. We rub elbows with these guys. And, we know a lot of them on a first name basis. What I think will probably happen is there'll be some type of merger with the Mountain West. There's potential at places like UNLV, especially in a place like Las Vegas, with playing. It might be a powerful recruiting tool playing at the Death Star. Boise State has a pretty good record against the Pac-12. So does Fresno State. You could probably come up with something. It's not the end of the world. You're not just going to not play a sport because, it all kind of generates a lot of money at those schools.
Yeah, it's not like Simon Fraser where they got cut off from everybody and they just had to drop the program because they were way up in Vancouver. They were kind of the exception.
No, the sun will rise tomorrow. They'll figure something out.
Yeah.
But,
well,
my thing is, like, everyone's freaking out about this NIL stuff going out of hand. There's only so many guys making money on it. And it'll probably calm down some. Same thing with the transfer portal. If college football wants to do anything to save itself, sooner or later they're going to need to expand the playoffs. So because we all know we want to see a greater 5 team, a greater 6 or whatever they call them now, team in the final. If you find the right coach that gets the right group of players and at the right time, they could very well make it to that game. I think so. They just need an opportunity and an equitable chance.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, I just want to say good luck with Western Oregon as well. I mean, it's great to always hear your thoughts on what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And then that's a thing too. When recruiting is the name of the game in college football, everything all the X's and O's are based off of that. What you can get, what people do, and if they want to even up the odds, a 12-team playoff is going to make that equitable. Well, why would I want to ride Pine, as a 3-star or a 4, like a 3.5-star or 4-star recruit at Alabama or Clemson or Notre Dame for 3 years when I could go to to UAB or some school or like Coastal Carolina and be a starter for 3 years and possibly play the all-conference team, maybe get a shot at the NFL. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And we
well,
sorry, Bob.
So no. I just want to. We have so many people up this particular one. I want to allow some other people to get a chance to talk, because we dominated way too much ourselves early on. But I want to. If it's okay, Coach, I'd like to move on to a couple more people, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks for your time.
No, absolutely, Coach. It's always great to hear from you. You know, Ski Mask, you've been really patient. Ski Masks Murphy, would love to hear from you.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to talk about this topic because it seems like with sort of like this collapse in a sense of college football, only a few people sort of like seen this coming ahead of time. I mean, I do recall Jim Tressel, like now a lot of his players are coming out from the Ohio State days of the 2000s. They're saying, he saw when the Big East was spinning out, he sort of called it being, it's going to end up only being really 3 conferences. But even going further back with Coach Eddie Robinson of Grambling State, I think it was like 84 or 86, back when they were sort of going against what at that time was sort of like the way the TV contract said. It was like the NCAA sort of like gave contracts out and said, all of these schools are packaged together for a region. You got to show every school. And all of the big schools are pushing against it. And Eddie Robinson was sort of the only person there who said, yeah, this is going to dilute the sport down to the end where everyone's just going to sort of be chasing money. And the big schools are going to, just take off running. And then all the small schools are going to be left behind. And it seems like that's going to be happening now.
Well, that's some wisdom from one of the great coaches of all time, Eddie Robinson. I mean, the world is still less for not having him around. But yeah, I think there were folks who were smart enough to know that the moment it started to become more about, I mean, not to say it wasn't always about money, but it was to an extent. But when the money got big, and the bigger the money gets, the crazier this gets. And I do hesitate to say, because I do see, and I understand the thinking. There's fans all over the place that are saying, "Oh, the networks are doing this. The networks are the puppeteers." I would say I would hold back just a little bit on that. I think yes, the networks like it, but I don't. I feel a chicken and an egg situation here. The networks want to make things so that they can get their own financial profit off of this, but they're struggling too. I mean, ESPN's the cable cutting that's going on everywhere is kind of hurting them all. So they're really too busy, hemorrhaging talent to be machinations of trying to put some of these conferences together and make some of these calls. But certainly, though, they're the ones willing to pay the money. So we see conferences bending to play by the rules that they see that are out there, and hiring consultants who are probably telling them this is what the conference will pay you more for. But I think a lot of folks saw this coming, at least those who'd been around long enough. And maybe this is a bit further than they expected, but I think there are some folks out there with that level of wisdom who saw it. Thank you so much. That was really good input. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and let up Will. Let's see here. Will Decker, going to let you up next. Would love to hear from you. And again, we'll try to get to everybody. We try to let people up right before we want you to speak, only because there's sometimes some errors with Twitter Spaces. They've been going on forever, but sometimes we'll let you up, and then I can't hear you. And you're talking. Literally everyone in the audience can hear you, but me. So I'll have to actually reset my end of it, and then everyone has to sit and wait. So that's why I apologize. If you're in the queue, we will get to you. We just wait until the last possible second to let you up, only to avoid that error that started to appear about 5 months ago. But all that said, Will, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, man? Really pumped to be talking with you guys. I just want to get your opinions on this because I grew up in Pac-12 country. It's very sad that everything is kind of, evaporating. The question, Oregon is going to experience similar success to what they've had, and I know they got money. I'm a Dan Lanning believer for the most part. I think what they're doing there is impressive, and with Nike's backing, they can pretty much compete with a lot of different scenarios. But are we sure that Oregon is going to be the same level of competitor that we've seen them going to a more superior conference in the Big Ten, where they got to play the Michigans, the Ohio States, they got to go to Happy Valley? I mean, as you know, man, even those Wisconsin, Iowa road games are very tough, and you couple that with USC being back. I think UCLA, be too much involved with, what their statement is. But I think they're a program on the rise, man. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think Oregon and Washington coming into the Big Ten, I don't know if I would expect them to immediately rise to the top or consistently be at the top with I'm even hesitant to say USC and UCLA will necessarily automatically go to that top. But to be with that Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State certainly seems to be climbing closer and closer each year, and this may be that year for them. Certainly, I think one of them will come up and one of them will rise. But the better argument I've heard is they'll certainly be in the upper half, in the sense that they'll be competing to be in that conference title game each year. It may not be as consistent as some of the other programs, but they'll always be on that upper level. They'll be competing with Wisconsin. They'll be competing with programs that occasionally do punch their way through and have really good seasons. And especially with this expanded playoff, that could be good enough. That could be good enough to get you an even bigger shot at the pie than what we've been having, up until now. So I think they have that opportunity to do that and to compete at that level. Now with the Trojans and Bruins, we'll see how they do. I mean, I'm a Trojan. I want them to succeed there, but I want you to see UCLA not embarrass itself. Haha, sorry. But I do want to see them do well.
Yeah, no, we get it, man. You better. I mean, I was out at every spring practice. I cover UCLA for LA Football Network. If anyone's listening, check us out. We got some good stuff. So I was at every spring practice. That's going to be a damn good football team this year. I think they're going to threaten, 10 wins, which is their program record. So I think that's very much in play for them. With you guys at SC, I'm just more convinced that with Lincoln Riley, the Heisman returning, I just know what you guys are. You guys are Ferrari when you guys get the right coach in there, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Last question I got for you, Reddit College Football. Texas. Are we sure that they're rising through the ranks? Sarkisian can recruit, and you're a USC guy, so you know this. Can recruit. He can do almost everything but coach a very, very good football team. He's never had double-digit wins in his career. Is it win or bust this year for Sark, especially with him going to the SEC?
That's that one to say. Well, but then again,
if we're talking caution. If we're talking cautionary tales, I'm seeing an echo on Andrew. Sorry, Andrew, mute for a second there. But yeah, if we're talking cautionary tales, the program that I think is also a good example is Miami, because they were absolutely terrifying in the Big East. Everyone thought they were going to drop into the ACC, and then they still have yet to win that conference. But going back to Sark, I don't know if I think Texas is willing to give him more room, at least for this season, as long as he can kind of compete at that level that he was this last season. Granted, 8-5 wasn't perfect, and yeah, you're right. He hasn't ever had a double-digit win season. I think if he wins the right games and gets to an even, if he can get, if there's an improvement, I think they'll give him a fourth year. I'm not sure I would put him exactly on the hot seat unless something really goes off the rails for them. But we'll see.
I'm with you, man. I think anything less than 9 wins this year, and that might even be before a bowl game, I think he's in hot water just because the Texas boosters know they're going to the SEC. This is going to be them playing Bama their game, But if he doesn't get to double-digit wins this year with Quinn Ewers, who isn't perfect, but I mean, we've all seen the flashes with that kid. He's wonderful to watch when he's on. I don't foresee a future of him at Texas, especially with them moving to the biggest conference we have in college football. So I'm out on it. You guys do a great job. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us. And, just one last thought on that. I think it'll be interesting, kind of another question, like, would it be a situation where, well, let's start fresh in the SEC, or let's give him one shot, at least one season in the SEC to see how he does? But I don't know which way they'll go. I think if it goes, well, it depends on the season. If things start off really poorly for Texas, and I don't expect them to, then maybe that'll start coming up here. Hey, Ronnie J, what's going up? Yeah, boy, Ron.
Hey, can you guys hear me? I'm wearing my headphones today, so I don't know how this is working.
Sounds great on our side.
Ah, perfect. So the other day I was talking about UConn. Also, wait, just real quickly. Yesterday I heard that Rutgers question, and was very happy that Rutgers got some attention in these, and it wasn't me talking about how we suck.
Well, I had to ask Stuart Mandel, because they just published that article that was basically saying was Rutgers the biggest mistake in realignment. And I was like, well, we're running out of time, but I'm like, I gotta at least ask something about the question. So I decided instead reverse and say something nice about Rutgers.
We absolutely were a mistake in realignment, and when it comes to the point where they're going to start kicking people out, we get kicked out of the Big Ten. I'm going to be like, all right, that's I knew this was coming. But back to what I was talking about on last week when I called. I was talking about UConn. I was like, I don't understand why the ACC wouldn't make a move on UConn. And you guys are like, well, they don't really know what's going on with FSU and Clemson. They're kind of in a weird spot. But if they're going to add other schools, again, UConn's right there. Sure, the football's not there, but the basketball is, and it gets them into, what's it called, New York. It gets them up decent bit of the New York City market if we're talking about that. I personally know a bunch of UConn grads who live in New York City. So it gets them into the New York market. And if FSU and Clemson end up leaving, I mean, you don't want to end up the Pac-12.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the one program, probably the one conference that has seemed to be the most interested in UConn has been the Big 12. And that is a lot on Brett Yormark because obviously he's a hoops guy. He was in New York. He was with the Nets for all those years. So he is apparently, and I remember we actually asked Stuart about it yesterday because I was trying to figure out like how much of this is coming from the Big 12, how much of this is just Brett Yormark really likes UConn. And it's not clear, but I think I'm leaning towards this is just Yormark's pet, idea in the sense that he sees the value of basketball. He's not dumb. He knows football is the big moneymaker, but basketball's good. UConn's obviously great at it. They're in the New York market. He knows them well enough being up there. So I think that's one of those things. He really would love that opportunity to get some high-profile games in Madison Square Garden, maybe even have a Big 12 tournament up there or something like that. So I know that's part of it for him. Now, whether or not they ever get added, that's a whole other question. Now that the Pac-12 finally fully came apart, this is when it was just Colorado had joined. So it almost felt like UConn was the backup. Like if the Pac-12 stayed together and they wanted to go ahead and round that number out, they were going to add UConn. At this point, I'm not sure if UConn is on the table anymore. It almost feels like, a Hollywood situation where they're trying to cast a really big star. And then they're like, you know what? We're looking at this other guy. He's willing to take a little less and he's an up and coming actor. And then, the big star comes along. That's what it felt like when the four corners, the schools came over. But we'll see. I think the ACC is an interesting one. I mean, if they decide to pull them in, they always have to ask what value they're adding. And they have the Beast. They have BC. They have Syracuse. I don't know if they want to keep going into the New England market. I don't know how much is really there for a college football, for the college football focus of a lot of these decisions. But that's where I think the Big 12 one was interesting because UConn is definitely in an area they're not in. But I think it's an interesting question. I think UConn, I'm more curious than I was before because, again, I remember that conversation we had. We said, look, they're not the greatest, but they're not awful. Like, they have built enough facilities there where they could probably plug into a conference, and where we said Oregon and Washington will compete on the upper half of a conference, I could see UConn being in the lower half of a conference, but not at the bottom, so it would be interesting. I'd be very curious to see what happens to them as these moves happen, because they're out there. They've been wanting to join a conference for a long time, but they're still kind of just waiting.
Yeah, I mostly want it to happen, not because I think it makes the most amount of sense, but because I don't want the ACC to die, which I think would happen if Clemson and FSU were to leave. So the only way to really help yourself in that case is you're not going to find another FSU or Clemson. It's just not going to happen. Is to just try to round it out as much as you can. Just add whoever you can take that can deliver any value. And UConn for basketball at the very least will deliver value. I don't know. Like you said, their football's not the greatest, so they're not going to be delivering too much value there.
For sure. Hey, Waterboy, I see you're up here. Just wanted to say, hey, you're one of our team. You're one of our reporters. You were at Pac-12 Media Days. What's going on?
Well, I wanted to tell you guys how great the interview was yesterday with Stuart Mandel. And I wanted to kind of highlight something that was said that was just kind of glossed over. The fact when he was breaking down what is like known information to some, but probably not to much, that the Big Ten schools, they sold their rights to the Big Ten network, and the Big Ten network, the majority got sold to Fox, and so Fox essentially owns all the rights to the Big Ten schools. And he just kind of said that, and it was like, yeah, but how many people actually like realize that? And that's just like the kind of like the big over like arching item of all of the expansion is just how much Fox owns, like in the college football broadcasting world.
And it's a bit perilous because we see, ESPN is contracting because of the cable cutting. Fox, has divested a lot of its properties because of its own kind of the problems with linear television. And this is the awkwardness of it all. If you looked at the Pac-12 deal, they were getting something like it. The exact numbers aren't known, but it was like 20 million. And then they could boost it up with escalators, as they were calling it, to potentially competitive with the Big 12 had they brought on a certain X number of subscribers. I think it's like 1.5 million subscribers to Apple TV Plus. But and that spooked the conference because the whole reason the Pac-12 is in the situation they were is because Larry Scott convinced them that when they did their own cable network, they should own it completely themselves, and then completely botched all of the ability to get it on DirecTV, get it onto it was just that decision making had really burned the conference before, and I think scared them from taking something new here. But all that said, the future, I mean, as we kind of look at where things are going with television, I mean, I forgot sometimes the average age of the cable subscriber is close to retirement. It's a really astonishingly high number. I mean, when it's still older than me, I feel like, wow, that's a high number. When it gets into the 40s, I'm like, oh no, that's not old. But but that said, that doesn't bode well. But I think they're willing to just stick with this model as long as it's willing to cough out the dough. But there could be a moment where, does the certain point with the cable, the cord cutters start to make an impact, and then the next round of media deals, it's impossible to make these. But I think that in which case an Apple deal or an Amazon deal or one of these deals suddenly becomes the next move. But the Pac-12 just wasn't willing to do that, and for those reasons, that's why it flew apart when it did.
And he had the most interesting kind of line where he said, ultimately, Fox said, hey, we can make our ratings on a Friday night go from a 0.4 or 0.5 to a 1.0. So that's worth killing off a 100-year-old conference because that extra half point will be profitable for us.
I know Crow would wanted to keep that together until the last second, and he would have been like, yes. I do love the fact that he referred to it, the president of Arizona State, as like Star Trek technology and things like that, and people were like, okay. People were like, did they show him an iPad and he's like, what is this? Oh my gosh. You can watch television on this? I feel so bad, but he's become the punching bag of all of this conversation. He's an educated person. He's president of the university. It's Arizona State, but it is the university.
It's going to blow his mind when he goes to the grocery store and finds out he can actually like self-checkout and scan things.
Oh my gosh. I just wouldn't want to be behind him in the line. That's all I got to say.
Right.
Self-checkout. Yeah. Hey, hang out with us.
I just really want to tell you guys how good it was yesterday with Stuart Mandel, and just kind of highlight that point that literally the Big Ten, like, viewing is owned by Fox. And so that's like basically huge for not just the next, like all the future media deals for college football.
Absolutely. Well, let's see here. We got someone else up here. We'll try to get as many as we can. Roberto, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for
thanks for your patience, man. I just want to say that. And we know we try to get to as many folks as we can.
Yeah, no problem. So a lot of the talk's been about the nuances of the new conferences. I think we should pivot towards some actual football here. And I got a dark horse pick for the Heisman. I think Jaden Ott out in Berkeley is going to be a real player this year for the Heisman.
This is a really fascinating time, I think, for some of these candidates, especially if they're, someone at Cal or someone at Oregon State, as we talked about, they're ranked in the preseason in the top 25 in the first coaches poll. They're going to get a lot more eyeballs on them because of what's going on. So normally you'd almost say but They're not going to get the attention. Everyone's going to look at USC number one, then who's the new quarterback at Ohio State, what's going on at Michigan. People are going to still be looking at, obviously Notre Dame's got that great transfer that's going to be leading them. There's so many of those, but now suddenly everyone's like, well, people are going to be curious to see what happens, especially the Pac-4. How are they going to do in this final season? So that might give them those eyeballs. And if Cal starts to win enough games and win the right games, I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility, although it isn't still an unfair award in a lot of ways. So you need some of the other programs to kind of struggle a bit, but I don't think it's impossible.
Right. Okay, I get that. And what do you think about Cal and Stanford and their situation with the?
Well, conference? I think they're in a slightly better situation than Oregon State and Wazoo, which is regrettable for those two teams. But at the same time, Cal and Stanford still have some attraction. They're in the Bay Area. It's not like an unpopulated place. There's some TV there. It's not quite as hyper for college football. We had the first national championship we ever covered, and we had a reporter who's local because we weren't sure they'd let us in. Was actually when it was in Levi Stadium, and it was so dead. Like, our reporter was like, you could literally walk around downtown San Jose. Every big name from ESPN is just walking around the streets, and no one knows who they are because no one here's a college football fan. But all of that said, there's still some attraction in bringing that in. I think the ACC might be a call for that. I mean, because it's so fun. The Big Ten just doesn't sound like they're interested. They got the two teams they were willing to do. That last year, it seems like they were willing to analyze every Pac-12 program as a potential carry along with the USC and UCLA poach. Kevin Warren, the outgoing, who's now obviously he's no longer the commissioner, but he was more bullish on the Big Ten expanding more. And by all accounts, it was the presidents of the Big Ten universities said, like, no, that's enough. Let's first figure out USC and UCLA and move on from there. And then obviously Kevin Warren, who was from the NFL before, went back to the NFL. Now he's heading the Bears. So Petitti, I'm pretty sure, just took an off-the-shelf, like, well, in case the Pac-12 explodes, what teams would we really want? And that's why they were almost immediately able to jump in and grab Oregon Oregon and Washington. Now, Stanford and Cal, it seems like they're still not desirable to them. The ACC approach and possibly coming with, Southern Methodist, that one sounds like it. I'm not going to say it sounds like it has strong legs. It sounds like it's the one that is actually being considered. But whether it goes anywhere, it's going to depend. And I'm not sure. I mean, Stanford and Cal are academically, among the very top universities, but that will only take you so far. I mean, are we going to look at, there was a good article, I think Sam Kahn wrote it for The Athletic, where he was talking about comparing this breakup of the Pac-12 to when the Southwest Conference broke up. And then you had a team like Rice, which was, competing in the same conference with Texas, suddenly just sort of cast adrift because they were an academic powerhouse, but they really weren't desirable to some of these other conferences, and they kind of, withered over time. I'm not sure. And as I mentioned earlier, Cal has so much of that financial liability because of the stadium renovation that they're still dealing with, and they've had bad luck. I feel so bad for them. They got, I still remember Kabam Field. They got a mobile game maker to do a field rights deal. So it was like Kabam Field at California Memorial Stadium. That lasted 2 years. And then who's the next big name they got in? FTX. So that lasted a season and a half before FTX imploded in the court, and is currently in the courts right now. So I feel bad. It's like everything is stacked against them financially.
Yeah, it's I appreciate the sympathize with them. I noticed a lot of people in college football are kind of kicking them while they're down,
which is a shame. I think that's a shame. I think nationally, I think that might become a little bit more out of the corners of the Pac-12. But I think once you leave the Pac-12, you see a lot more sympathy for the four that are currently figuring out where the heck they're going to go.
All right. Well, I appreciate you giving your opinion on that. But I want to end on one thing. You said that Oregon, you thought that they would be on the kind of the same level as Wisconsin in the Big Ten, right?
I think they would be in that kind of zone of like the upper half of the Big Ten in terms of competition. But thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
Absolutely. Let's see here. I'm going to let on my son Bort. All right, my son Bort, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going? Well, first of all, I'd say I'm a San Diego State fan. So the last 13 months have been pretty much a consistent kick in the crotch leading up to this week.
Well, it could have been worse. Imagine if San Diego State had paid the exit fee for the Mountain West to show up in the Pac-12. Imagine that. And then all this goes to hell. Like, that would have been far. I mean, it's weird. They're in such a weird circumstance. Like, it could have been so much worse. And then I don't know if you saw, and I'm sure you as a San Diego State, you saw this back-to-back. Dennis Dodd at CBS reports that San Diego State apparently tried to create a new Power 5 conference with the remnants of the Pac-12, some of the Mountain West, and some of the American. And then, almost immediately afterwards, Wicker, the athletic director of San Diego State, calls that out as being completely false. So that has been one of the more amusing kind of back-to-back article and tweet that came out today. It's been absolutely fascinating to see how that goes. And I mean, part of us, some folks, I mean, at RCFB are reacting like, was it really false, or was it just that it didn't work out? Because so much of this stuff happens behind closed doors. I mean, think about a little over a year ago, no one expected UCLA and USC to leave when they did, and suddenly within like 24 hours, it's like, oh my gosh, they just left they're going to be leaving the Pac-12. If someone had said it earlier, people would have been like, no, they were never leaving. That's just a crazy rumor. So I don't know. It's hard to tell in college sports.
Well, I didn't really call the topic because I've fully moved on to the acceptance of Group of Five and the zen that is, avoiding this dumpster fire that is everything we've all been involved in and talking about this past week. And just, I don't know. I just haven't seen any takes like that yet. They're like, you know what? This is what college football is supposed to be. Who do you think is going to have who do you think has a better fan experience? App State fans or Indiana fans? Right. And so I just think, maybe it's some time to kind of go back to really what makes college football, enjoy it. Who cares how many administrators are in my athletic department, how many nutritionists are on staff? Let's just have some good football.
Absolutely. I think that's it. I can't wait for the kickoffs to start happening. I guess I can't remember. Is that game in Ireland, the first kickoff? But I can't wait for football to start, and the rest of this will sort of fall away until we get past this. But thanks so much for joining us, man. It was good hearing from you. All right. Next up, I'm going to let up, let's see here, Cooper Ray. Cooper Ray, what's going on? Love to hear from you. And it's always funny if you come up to the live tables, suddenly I've been told there's an audio jump. So once we let you up to the stage, you go to the live feed. So Cooper, when you get a chance to unmute, would love to hear from you. Oh, do we have someone not make it? Sometimes it happens. That's been a while. That was a good run we had there with that not happening. Let's see here. I'm going to go with Andrew. Andrew Gilmore. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going? Can you
sure
hear me
can.
okay?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so don't want to sound like a hater because I'm actually from the Midwest, and I love Big Ten football. But I think it's kind of ridiculous how overrated Michigan is nationally. I mean, number 2 in the coaches poll. My question for you is, do you think, or it's really a two-part question, do you really think that Michigan is in the conversation to be the second best team in the country? And then the second part of it is the Big Ten as a conference, despite how much clout they have, are they anywhere near as good as the SEC? Because I think about a team like Tennessee last year who played a much tougher schedule than Michigan, went into LSU, beat them by 30 points. And if you look at Michigan's schedule last year, their only big win was, and hats off to them, they went into Ohio State, won that game. Then they go into the Final Four and lose to, I'm sorry to say, a mediocre TCU team. And we're supposed to expect Michigan is the second best team in the country. And then look back to 2021 when Michigan ran the table, didn't play anybody all year. They had a 1-game season against Ohio State, won that game, and then got blown their doors off against Georgia. And so I just think what's the difference between Michigan and like a Brian Kelly Notre Dame team. Like, why are we giving so much respect to them? That's my question.
Well, I think, and I love how hot this one is. This is great. I love the question because I can feel some of the Michigan fans already kind of getting really
Well, I
upset
just think
and
they're.
getting
I
rid
mean,
of typewriters.
a one-game
But-
season should not mean everything. Like, I just think I'm a Notre Dame fan actually, but I do have respect for Michigan. But I just think like an SEC team who's got to beat 5-6 good teams every year, like that's respect. You know what I mean? Like a one-game season and like that makes you the second best team in the country. I'm sorry. I need to see more. You got to beat somebody outside.
Well,
of
I
the Big
think.
Ten.
Well, I understand where you're coming from on this, but at the same time, we have to credit Michigan for getting to the playoff. You know, a couple of times in a row they lost to Georgia, and then this time, they lost to TCU, but then Ohio State nearly knocked off Georgia, and then we saw what happened in the title game. We'll set that aside.
Yeah.
But
But I mean, come on, man. Like,
then the Magic left TCU.
Have you seen Michigan's non-conference schedule? It's really been a joke the last 2 years. I mean, they're not challenging themselves.
I definitely agree. Scheduling, especially as a Notre Dame fan, you get to point at other people and say your scheduling is weak. I get that.
For being totally transparent, but I'm really an objective fan. Like, I like Jim Harbaugh.
Oh yeah, no. And I didn't mean that as an insult to being a Notre Dame fan. I'm just saying Notre Dame's schedule's tough.
Is the Big
Notre
Ten
Dame's
even on SEC's level? Like, could Ohio State or Michigan go 11-1 in the SEC? I mean, I guess that's the ultimate question. I don't think they can, but I mean, and do they deserve this kind of respect? Yeah.
Well, I think certainly Michigan, as long as you keep, I mean, the Big Ten, you could argue season to season if who's stronger, the SEC or the Big Ten. I think certainly top to bottom for the last several seasons, or most of them at the very least, the SEC could make that argument. They've been the stronger conference top to bottom. But I think Michigan making its way through the Big Ten schedule is still, because I mean, if we're going to talk about non-conference schedule, the SEC certainly can't point fingers. We all know the SEC's non-conference schedule is just as it's smart scheduling if you want to look at it this way.
Well,
I mean, if you're trying to be
Bama
a national
went
title
into
contender
Texas last year. They went into Texas.
Yes, no, absolutely, and it's not
LSU,
like
when
those
won in
games don't occur.
2019, They went right into Texas. I mean, it's like at least they're trying to schedule a tough game. It's like Michigan's playing
and
UConn. They're playing like some MAC team. It's just like, what is going on here? It's like I think it's really ridiculous that I think you should be penalized, and I think you can get sucked into the idea because the Big Ten has so much clout media-wise, and like, hey, hats off. Jim Harbaugh has figured out how to beat Ryan Day. He could not figure out how to beat Urban Meyer, but he's figured out how to beat Ryan Day. But beating Ryan Day doesn't mean that you can go into Tuscaloosa and beat Nick Saban or go into Athens and beat Kirby Smart. So, like, I don't get why we're giving them so much respect. I mean, one game does not make a season. But I apologize. I won't
well,
interrupt
to be
anymore.
fair, he won 13 games last season, and with one loss. But I certainly can see why there's a lot of skepticism.
Who did he beat?
I know
Purdue.
People thought he was overrated, so I get that, but I'm going to have to give Harbaugh some credit there. I mean, whether 2 is too high, I don't know. I think that was an interesting one to see in the coaches poll. I'm more curious than the AP poll, but I know that like some other folks have had him high as well, at least in the top 10, mostly because they who they're returning. They're returning a good quarterback. They're returning a lot of starters. We'll see, but I mean, ultimately, I'm very curious to see if Penn State is going to rise up and knock them off, and of course, we're going to see at the end of the year how they do against Ohio State, and of course, anything can happen between then and now. But thanks for your opinions on this. We really appreciate it. Thanks for joining.
I'll just end on this. I just think that the SEC, you have to give them credit. They've won tons of championships over the last 17 years. Their guys tend to, I mean, I know Georgia doesn't have the hardest schedule now, but they tend to play at least one tough non-conference game. I think it's ridiculous that Michigan is going to stay by the last 2 years and not play one decent non-conference game. And then we're going to say that they're the number 2 team in the country just because they beat up on Wisconsin and Minnesota and Illinois. I mean, that's ridiculous, but I'll end on that.
All right. Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank
and
you.
It looks like, Cooper, we got you back up, and this time I think I actually heard you. So what's on your mind?
Yeah, sorry, man. My earphones weren't working.
Don't worry, it happens. We've had everything. It's really funny when we schedule a guest way ahead of time. This didn't happen this week, but And then they get there and they're like, oh, I have to use my phone.
Yeah, no, that's all good. I mean, the whole thing with I love to think and put myself in people's shoes, and I'm trying to think what the Big Ten's thinking behind closed doors, after they've kind of gone through this past weekend and everything that transpired. I feel like they got two options, and one school in particular is one that has to have been on their mind for decades, how to get them in, and that's Notre Dame to me. That's the one big fish that I think they've always wanted to have. And I feel like they're with the Florida State Clemson stuff. I'm like, do you think they have two options they could go after? Because I feel like if there's one school that got left out this past weekend, they could maybe throw a lifeline to is Stanford. And I feel like if they did that, then they could go to Notre Dame and say, hey, listen, we got Stanford, USC, some traditional rivals, and then you can keep playing Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. But I feel like if they do that, they have to go all in, and then you can't really have room for the Florida State Clemson scenario or North Carolina, Virginia schools, stuff like that. I just want to get your opinion on that.
Well, realistically, I don't think Notre Dame's ever going to join anything. I every time it comes up, they are absolutely no go on this. Yeah. They don't want to be part of it. I think, and one of my co-hosts who isn't here right now, Sirius, he put it pretty well in the offseason. I forgot the way he phrases exactly, but the only shot, anyone ever really had at Notre Dame was in the pandemic when the conference schedules turned into conference only. The ACC could have held Notre Dame over the coals and said, you got to join as a full member before we let you play this season. That was the closest anyone got. And they didn't. They were like, no, we're going to be nice to them. And then Notre Dame's like, thank you. And then just, Notre Dame's going to be Notre Dame. I think they value that independence so much. Historically, they were, if you really want to look back, they kind of scandalized the original College Football Alliance in the 1990s, because that was what used to negotiate on behalf of all the conferences but the Big Ten and Pac-10. They actually had their own conference deals, but all the other conferences, SEC, Southwest Conference, Big Eight, WAC, they all went in one pack and kind of negotiated their TV rights until one day Notre Dame decided, hey, we're leaving. NBC's our TV rights deal, and that was one of the major cracks, they say, that eventually broke that all up, especially when the Southwest Conference imploded. But all of that said, I think that's the continuing theme. The Notre Dame mindset is we're going to stay independent. So I think realistically, you can't rely on them. I think if they ever said we're willing to join a conference, we're going to see one of the wildest competitions of The Bachelor, ever made.
Yeah. Well, I'm just kind of thinking, with these mega conferences coming, I'm assuming, these TV companies, they're going to be they want to get bang for their buck, and they're going to say, well, 9 conference games, 10 conference games. There's 24 teams in a conference, and you want to get everybody playing, you don't want one school not to play another for 4 years. You're going to have to say, we want to play 10 or 11 conference games. Well, then I feel like Notre Dame's scheduling is going to be hard to map out for projected years when everybody's like, well, we already got to play 10, 11 conference games. Maybe I don't really want to play you. And then you got to start picking up group of 5 games. And then your schedule, no matter what, Notre Dame goes 9-3, they're going to make the playoff every year if it goes to a 12 team. It is what it is.
Yeah, and especially with the expanded playoff, they've got no reason to join. If as long as they can schedule in, that'd be good. Hey, Andrew, I know you wanted to add something to this. That's Iowa State.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks, bud. That's all I had.
Well, we appreciate it, Cooper. Thanks for joining us. Let's see here. I don't want to let us all. There's so many people who wanted to join. Let's keep this going a little bit longer. Let's see here. CFB Power Pick'em. I'm going to go ahead and let you up. Then I'm going to try and get to our friend Gamecock Superman. Looks like SSN Boise State and Gail. I'll try to get to all of you guys. Just be patient, I promise. All right, what's going on?
Hey guys. Hey, thanks for taking the request. So one of the things that I've kind of been kicking around in my head is trying to think like a TV exec, but also think like a college football sicko like we all are. So, big money, big TV, big brands, they're all realigning, making this stuff happen. I kind of think a lot about how these smaller schools are going to suffer, quote unquote, if they can't schedule, like the last guy was just talking about. They can't schedule some of these power guys to get a paycheck, or and they're not going to want to spend their out of conference time playing smaller schools. They're going to start looking more amongst the power two or whatever that becomes, because these are big brands on big TV making big money. They're not going to go there. So if I'm to believe that this is happening because the sport has never been more popular, that more people are tuning into college football, showing interest in it, then I have to think that what is stopping the G5 level from going out, picking up some of these teams that are being relegated down to their level because they're being kicked out of the power level? And, hey, who's to say, like Joel Klatt mentioned before, that some of these teams that are already in the power level don't get relegated down later in time, as this becomes more and more critical and more about money. But that the G5 go out, pick up these teams, somebody with leadership, bring these conferences together and say, hey, there's available inventory out there for us to drop games during the week. It's not always just about Saturday. They can find slots during the week, run their games, and then say, hey, let's do a playoff ourselves. Who's to say ESPN doesn't come around and say, we want more inventory? I doubt that they would, considering they have all the power programs wrapped up. But, I just see the G5 could go find somebody like, I'm making it up, the CW, for God's sake. I mean, if they pulled golf, who's to say the CW doesn't want to do CFB, something like that? Do you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, and it's funny you mentioned the CW, because at one point it sounded like the Pac-12 is negotiating with them and they just didn't get numbers they wanted. But the G5 is an interesting circumstance right now. I've heard the idea of a parallel playoff before. That's been bandied about over the last, I would say, 5-6 years. But one of the things that may have put that to rest is the idea of expanding the playoff, which is coming next year. Not this season, but next season, when we suddenly have a 12-team playoff. Now you really do have an opportunity for not just, a participant in the New Year's Six or that rarity of when Cincinnati made the playoff, but there's real opportunity now for some of these teams to get in. That said, the G5 has always been the master of coming up with some of these more creative financing ideas. The Mountain West actually used to come up with I used to enjoy listening to what the Mountain West plans were each season, because at one point they put a game on Twitter. They were trying to put a game on like Facebook. Like they were testing ideas that even the NFL later did. Right before the NFL would do it, they were willing to try some of these ideas, mostly because their payouts were low to begin with, and they were willing to try new ideas. I believe I read the Mountain West media deal pays out something like $6 to $9 million per team. That's a huge range, but it's somewhere in that high single digits. Whereas obviously Cal and Stanford previously were getting $34 million per year, and they were going to get less no matter what. They knew they were going to get less with this new deal, just not as low as what George Kliavkoff, the commissioner, brought to them last week that caused the conference to spin apart. But so when we're looking at the strength of a G5 kind of coming together, I'm not sure. I mean, you're right, there will be interested in their programming. I don't know if they'll be willing to do a separate playoff, because now they have at least a theoretical shot at getting, now they will get in every year, at least in the next couple of playoffs once the expansion officially starts next season. But I'm not sure, they'll certainly be interested. You're right. There'll certainly be hunger for programming. And I think whether it's ESPN, I don't know, but it might be that. It might be a mix of the CW. Maybe Apple TV will be able to convince one of these conferences, because I'm pretty sure Apple wanted to make this work. I mean, they're not stupid. They saw the value in bringing in sports. They've obviously got an MLB package. They've got an MLS package. The idea of suddenly bringing in, some college football when it sometimes will peak to be the second most popular sport in the country, that there's no reason why they wouldn't want that. But I think it'll be the G5s will be the ones most likely to do that. But it's a matter of who's willing to pay them enough. And maybe when the next contract renegotiations come for them, for their media deals, we'll start to see some of these creative ideas. And maybe they'll be the canary in the coal mine. They'll be that's not the way I want to put it. They'll be the guinea pig. They'll be the one to actually take that Apple deal and prove that it works. And then suddenly the big conferences will be like, oh, well, we'll just do that as well. So it's a good question. It's a real open thought on where that'll actually go, though.
Yeah, and I'll end on this. Thanks for taking the question. I think it will have to happen for a separate playoff, and this is just me, and I'll put my crack pipe down when we're done. I think it will be important because if the big money, the big TV is going to follow these power conferences, that's going to be the only thing they're going to want to put on TV. They're not going to care about these little guys. I think that it's going to be a survival mechanism as much as it is going to be something that's good for the health of the sport overall and all of us to watch more football. So I appreciate you guys.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Hey, we're going to wrap up with a couple of more callers. I promise we're going to get to the 3 that are up here in the queue right now. I just let up Gamecock Superman, then SSN Boise State, and we'll wrap up with Gil. What's going on, Gamecock Superman? It's been a bit.
So how are you guys doing tonight? Obviously, I'm disappointed in the news about the Pac-12 and, going off of sort of what CFB Power Picks was talking about with these G5 teams and these teams that maybe aren't, the biggest brands in the sport. I'm wondering how this is going to affect the FCS level. Because as we know, one of the main revenue generators for these FCS athletic departments is being able to schedule the Power 5 teams and, getting 15 million, 20 million or whatever the number is to just, play these power teams and basically take an automatic L. Well, that isn't very fun for the fans for the most part. It does play an integral role in keeping these athletic departments who are on shoestring budgets alive. And I just think for the health of the sport, all the money can't be conglomerated into the top of, the biggest brands and the teams with the most money. It kind of reminds me of the situation that they had in European soccer where, they essentially wanted to do the same things rather than watching, Manchester United play some lower level team. They just wanted to have Manchester United play Real Madrid and all the other, big names within European club soccer. And the fans obviously stopped it, but it seems like within college football, the greed and the desire for money has sort of, not allowed for the fans to stop it. As many people have already discussed, they never asked the student athletes or the fans what they thought about realignment. It's all about just generating more revenue for, athletics departments who already have a ton of money and for, TV broadcasters.
I'm not quite as worried. I think I certainly don't think they have any legal ability to file an injunction or anything like that. But I think with the FCS programs, they'll still be needed. They'll still be. I mean, there still should be room for non-conference games. We had an earlier caller who was quite critical about Michigan scheduling. But certainly within the SEC and within the Big Ten, within all the major programs, but for like 2 of them, FCS games are still part of building a sort of an opportunity to get a home win. We assume, obviously there are exceptions to that, to get the home fans excited, to host something, get that extra home revenue. So I mean, there's certainly possibilities for them. I think really, and this has been a very long Twitter space, but at the very beginning, we kind of, there was a conversation with an earlier caller where the thought would be, I'm more interested in seeing once all of these FBS programs are finished moving, because we're certainly in an awkward time right now where things are not done. The existing Pac-4, whatever happens to them, and there's several variations out there. Whatever happens to does SMU move? Does all of these questions? Once we see some finality with where the conferences are going to settle down, I think then we might actually see a question of, well, will there be some G5 conferences that need a backfill, and in which case will they look close to themselves? Because if an FCS program, there's certainly some that are willing to move up, some don't have the interest. That would be my question. Will we start to see more FCS programs move up to backfill some of these G5s if they get heavily poached? Let's say the Mountain West, some of their teams somehow leave and join the Pac-12, what's ever left of the Pac-4, to kind of backfill that conference. Does the Mountain West then look to try and poach some teams from around them, like the Big Sky or something like that? And who knows? Does Idaho suddenly want to move back up? There's so many variations there. But in terms of scheduling them for the money games, which you're right, it's a part of the ecology of so many of these programs. They count on these. I think it's possible. I don't think they're going to disappear. I think there's still going to be an opportunity for them. Now, as kind of actually going back to one of the things Andrew said, I don't know if there would be an injunction by those FCS teams, but I could see a state legislature requiring, because I think there's a couple of states that do that, where the states require their FBS programs to occasionally play those other teams in the state to keep them going. So there's any variation there that could happen to keep some of those programs going. So we'll see, but you're right. If they go, as Andrew also said, the 10-conference game model, as the Big Ten is discussing, that could make it that will give fewer and fewer opportunities. Like, for example, for a USC, well, first of all, they're a terrible example because they've never played an FCS program, but one of their non-conference games is always locked into Notre Dame. I mean, South Carolina is always going to have a game with Clemson, whether they're in the same conference or not. So, I mean, there's some of these are just going to be always there, like Georgia and Georgia Tech. They're going to be part of that non-conference slate. But yeah, it's a good question, and hopefully that we will avoid some tough financial things for the FCS level, but that's a possible consideration. Thank you for bringing that up. Boy,
no problem. And
absolutely.
I appreciate you taking the time.
Always, man. You always ask great questions. Let's see here. We've got two more callers. We'll get to both of you. Our friend Boise State SSN, he's coming up. Let's see how that goes. I see we're getting kind of the spinning on my end. I'm seeing the spinning circle of trying to add him. So I'm going to try and add Gil as well. And we'll see who gets up first, and we can always talk to both of you. Hey, Gil, I can see you're up here. If you want to unmute, love to hear from you.
Yeah, how's it going? I appreciate it. I was just wondering if change it a little bit. I was just wondering if we could talk about the upcoming year. Big Louisville guy here, and I'm just wondering, are we buying or selling the Cardinals this year? Because down here, there's big buzz. No Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina on the schedule. There's high hopes down here with Brown coming back. I'm just wondering to get your take on what to look forward to for this year for the Cardinals.
Boy, oh boy, I know they've been put mostly in the middle of the ACC in a lot of the rankings I've seen. Oh my goodness! And I'm going to do the classic. Let's take a look at the old schedule. Well, opening at Georgia Tech, that's going to be an interesting one. I always feel like Louisville has an opportunity to compete for the top. They can make it. The ACC hasn't been the easiest for them, but they have an opportunity. So you're right. Looking at the schedule right now. For those who obviously are at home, you're probably listening to this. They open with Georgia Tech. They got an FCS game with Murray State, Indiana. So on definitely the weaker side of the Big Ten. BC, they're definitely a winnable program at NC State. Notre Dame, that's the circle. It's not a conference. Well, I always forget this. I know they're technically they play into the ACC, but does that count for conference standings? You can tell me this, Gil, off the top of your head, probably more than I can.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, well then we can just set them aside for a second. At Pitt, Pitt seems like they'd be a solid enough team this year. Duke, Virginia Tech, Virginia. At Miami, and then of course the rivalry with Kentucky, as we were just talking about out of conference rivalries. But that's a plausible schedule. There's an opportunity there to move further, build on that 8-5 season last year. Now. There's certainly now again, if they make it to and get the ACC title game, there might be a totally different question there. But I think they certainly, you're right. The schedule is extremely favorable for you guys this year. I mean, this is probably one of the better schedules in the ACC for getting to bowl eligibility and making a push. But I mean, I always love to rely on my callers. What do you think? What's the big strength for Louisville on the field this season? What should we all look out for?
Well, I think that's the thing is you see last year defense carried this team. Defense, just quarterback pressures, quarterback sacks. They were allowing, I think it was 16 points a game. Defense carried this team last year, especially when the offense wasn't playing good. But this year, you got Brom there. His Plummer, you got one of his old quarterbacks at Purdue coming back, so he's got the system down. I think we'll see a little flip of the script. Brom did really good in the transfer portal as well, I believe. And so it's essentially a new slate. And so there's this buzz going on down here where you're thinking, man, like, yeah, at Pitt's a tough game. BC was close. But if you can get past, if you can get some momentum in these first 4 games, if you can beat Georgia Tech, Murray State, there you go. Play Notre Dame well, you can gain momentum through this season. And so there's just, we don't know, but there's an excitement down here.
I think this is warranted. I'm looking more and more at who you've got. There's only 13 starters returning, but I mean, again, the schedule, especially with that start, seems favorable to getting the team moving in the right direction. So I get it. I think it's warranted. I think there's a real strong opportunity to finish in the upper half of the ACC. I'm going to hesitate to go further than that. We'll see how the team goes, but I think there's a good reason for that, and it seems like a lot of folks are agreeing with that. I admit, I check the Bible, I check Phil Steele when I'm not sure. And I know he's hot on you. He thinks the same thing in the sense that it seems like a really favorable opportunity for you guys to finish in the upper half. Well, I think this is a good opportunity to start wrapping this up. We typically do these for about an hour, and this has been going on now for an hour and 37 minutes. So the gas is clearly running out on the tank on me. Oh, wait, you know what? I see SSN Boise State. It didn't let him up before. I promised I would let him talk, so I like to be the person who meets my promises on this. Have you been able to connect there? Looks like
yes. Hello.
Hey, no problem. You be our last caller. What's going on?
So this will probably be one of the darker ones because I'm not feeling too good about everything. So not to end this on a sour note, but I've been listening, and there's a few people like my son Bort and CFB Power Pick'em that listed some things about the group of 5. And the thing that made me really want to talk the most is that at one point you said canary in the coal mine and you changed it to like something else. But I don't really think that you should have changed it because from the looks of a group of 5 fan, it literally looks like the group of 5 is going to be this canary in the coal mine. It'll be the warning to other conferences like we're going too far. We need to stop with all this expansion stuff. And the side effect of that is group of 5 gets basically relegated into irrelevance. And the reason I say that is like there's this idea out there that like a top tier group of 5 team like San Diego State, Boise State is almost better than like a mid-tier Power 5, but I don't see it that way because we're being left behind with less media money every year. The college football is being turned into a mini NFL league. And so who is going to want to watch these teams except for the dedicated fan base? And like Power Pick'em said, why doesn't group of 5 teams add these left behinds that aren't wanted by anybody else and make like a mini G5 playoff? I can't tell you how many times I've seen Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford fans say that they would rather lose their sport programs than be affiliated with Boise State. So they don't want us. Nobody wants that. Like the idea is cool, like backfill and make a conference, but ultimately the fans of those Power 5s don't want it. Obviously, these TV executives don't want it, or else programs in big markets like San Diego State or programs that have been amazing like Boise State would have been brought up. And the idea of a mini G5 playoff is basically just being relegated to almost an FCS level. And then there's also this idea that, you'll get this spot in the college football playoff. But I've seen so many media people saying, well, now that this has been fixed, we should relook at how the playoff has worked. We should relook. And I've seen so many people saying, we should allow second and third best teams in the Big Ten and the SEC to be in this playoff. So our college football playoff spot is being threatened. Nobody wants to deal with the leftovers. And the idea that being a top G5 team sounds good in theory, but if these teams were worthy enough to be top G5, why can't they be brought up? And so it all just kind of seems to not coexist. The ideas are cool, but the execution of them are not the same.
I think you've definitely put a strong voice to some of these concerns that have been among the G5 programs because of that. And you brought up again one of the gosh, you brought so many good topics. You brought up the fact that historically, especially Stanford and Cal have, lifted their nose at being part of a conference with not just Boise State, but, Fresno State, many of the other, some of the teams in the Mountain West, and that has been a sticking point to them, which has certainly earned them some bad blood among some of these programs, I think rightfully so, with some of the snootiness of it, but also kind of going to, the money issue is definitely the biggest part of it. I mean, the idea that those programs were making so much money and now they're going to drop no matter what. But at the same time, the top programs are getting more and more and more per year. I mean, the Mountain West, I forgot the exact payout. You might know it off the top of your head, but the media payout is somewhere in the realm of $6 to $9 million, I believe. And I think actually Boise State gets a little bit more, as if I'm correct, in the Mountain West, but it's still nowhere near the numbers we're talking about.
The Mountain West, I believe, is $5 million, and Boise is 6.8 with our extra home games. But I mean, that's crumbs compared to what the lowest tier Power 5 is getting, and the separation between the two is just getting more and more.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to a sort of a larger macro topic that has got if there. I don't want to say something keeps me up at night, but if there is a topic in college football that really does get me worried, and this is something that is believable, realistic. I mean, we had Stuart Mandel on last night, or actually yesterday evening, and he agreed that this is one of those big inevitabilities. And that is, we're going to probably see a day where college athletes are declared employees. And if that happens, some of these top programs will be able to keep going, but this is going to be devastating. Not just I'm not talking G5, I'm talking every level underneath it. I'm talking FCS, if we talk D2, D3. If suddenly, if certain rules are set and you have to pay all of your college athletes, it could be a nuclear option. So the reason I bring that up now is as we see this separation that's forming between the very, very top of the FBS, it's a theory that's been thrown out before, and a possibility, an option was, should they form a new division? And I don't know why. For the longest time, it was always being theorized. It's always been described as Division 4. I don't know why we call it that, because that's in the wrong order of the way we count our divisions. But a hypothetical Division 4 of the very elite P5 teams going and basically creating new rules. This is before NIL. They were like, why don't we create a new athletic association for the top college football programs where you can actually just pay players? Like, they were trying to come up with some solution for that to make it all work. And now, kind of looking at where we're going now with the two super conferences, would there be a smart move for, frankly, all of college sports to sort of stave off that employment issue by having them break off and actually say, okay, yeah, we will actually kind of move forward to something closer to an employee relationship with our student athletes? And the reason I say that, and again, going back to what I'd said much earlier, I read a very good article by Professor Michael McCann. He's a sports law professor who he used to write for SI, now he writes for Sportico, where he basically said if these programs don't decide to do something like this, you're always running the risk. And in California, I know we're seeing this possibility with some of the lawsuits that are being filed, but anywhere in America, you could get a federal judge to say, you know what? The way these NIL rules are being kind of loosened in all the states, we've talked about it before in previous shows, like there's a race between all the different individual states, like Missouri somehow took the lead, but, Texas and New York, and, making it so much easier to pay players in the NIL cloak, but basically pay them, that eventually you're going to get a judge that's convinced by legal argument that, they're employees. You literally all have employees. So you should treat them as employees and you owe them all of those things you owe an employee. So if that happens in an uncontrolled circumstance, you could suddenly really create havoc in college sports. I mean, that would just, I'm sure the smart people at many of the top programs have sort of contingency plans. What if this happens? But there's going to be a lot of other programs, especially the lower divisions you go, that are not going to be ready for that moment. So if we're talking darkness, I can go dark. that would be killer
yeah,
option.
and that's why you said canary in the coal mine, and that tapped into exactly how I'm feeling, because just from my point of view, it seems like not just 2007, 2010 when we had some of our best teams. It seemed like we always had a chance. Like there was a glimmer of hope that things could be better. And now 2023, even if we do merge with the Pac-4, how long does that last? How long does that last until Oregon State gets brought up or it falls apart again? And it's like, there's no hope anymore. It feels like everything that's happened is going to happen, and then eventually all of these Cinderella stories are going to go away. And I know I'm doing doom and gloom right now, but this is just a G5 point of view. Like the stuff that's happening right now is not good for the sport. It's only good for TV executives, and it's either get on the boat or sink. And I feel like many great G5 schools are going to sink due to just not being enough space.
Hopefully it won't, but I could see why that is a concern. And we're going to keep seeing how this develops. But thank you for closing us out there. That was a good way to kind of close this particular call-in show. We've been going for about an hour and 45 minutes for what was typically an hour slotted show, but so many people wanted to talk, and it was great to hear from all of you. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. This was, if you missed the beginning of it, this will turn into a recording. If you want to hear the beginning of it, we'll eventually put it on our podcast locations as our CFB Talk. But on that note, this was our CFB Talk 152. My name was Bob Akayeri. My co-host Andrew Sagona was also chiming in as well. I want to thank everybody who called in and everybody who listened. We really appreciate hearing from you. We do these every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. And we've even started doing some interviews again. If you want, you can go back and find the interviews we did last week with Phil Steele and Stuart Mandel. But on that note, I'm going to hang up and listen.